Namaskar. Welcome to this session. We were trying to characterize Kriyayoga and Kriyayogi. And we understood the very deep purport in the term Kriyayoga of Patanjali. Kriyayoga is a composite structure of philosophy, religion, practices of Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga. And therefore, we briefly understood these four yogs, which have often appeared in Adhyatmic traditions of Vedic Dharma. So, Patanjali in Sadhanapada is commencing this marvelous yoga of a Madhyamadhikari. And this Madhyamadhikari has these four important facets, which are by way of the four yogs. And that's why we had a very preliminary understanding of these four yogs. But we come across this fact that Patanjali has been more related to Ashtanga Yoga that he has mentioned later for Adhamadhikari, and Patanjali's relation with Kriya Yoga has not been highlighted, which is a travesty. It's also very surprising that the literature on yoga has not really portrayed in the literature which is dedicated to yoga. Maybe because this is the yoga of Madhyamadhikari. People are fascinated with the yoga of Uttamadhikari, and people are also fascinated with the yoga of Adhamadhikari, thinking that the yoga of Adhamadhikari can be embraced by everyone and anyone. So Patanjali has been equated with Ashtanga Yoga more prominently, and not much heed has been paid to Patanjali's contribution to Kriya Yoga. As I said, one of the reasons might be that Kriya Yoga is of a accomplished yogi, and we will be looking for yoga for ourselves. Common man looks for yoga for himself or herself, and we don't bother about yoga of accomplished yogi. And therefore, not much relationship has been established in the literature of yoga between Patanjali and Kriya Yoga, as much as it is seen in Patanjali and Ashtanga Yoga. The Yoga Dharma, Yoga Samskruti, the Yogachara, Achara, Vichara, Ahara, Vihara. These are Madhyamadhikaris who are adhering and embracing these principles, and therefore they have capacity for samadhi. They are qualified for samadhi. They are empowered for samadhi. And the common man looking for yoga will be not a samadhi yoga, but the yoga of a lower cadre, which perhaps one can interfere, dabble, handle. Vyasa has told us about the chitta bhumis, Mood, Kshipta, Vikshipta, Ekagra, Niruddha. And the commoners are in the Vikshipta bhumi, and therefore the yoga that can come in the way of a Vikshipta bhumi is more fascinating for the common man. And that is one of the reasons why Ashtanga Yoga has been equated with Patanjali and not that much Kriyayoga with Patanjali. This Kriyayogi is one who is really personified yogi. His life, his conduct of life, his philosophy of life, it is completely drenched in yogic culture. And he is now just to be taking a step to become Uttamadhikari. So he is on a landing where the next step would be putting him into the grade of Uttamadhikari. And that is called Samadhi Yoga. So we can understand what is the caliber of this Kriya Yogi. And so far we were trying to understand with the help of characterizing the Kriya Yoga by way of Jnana, Dhyana, Karma, Bhakti. So that is what a Kriya Yogi is, and who is just inches away from being an Uttamadhikari, because he is one who has inculcated, digested the entire yoga dharma. And then he would be soon becoming something like Jnaneshwars, Yajnavalkya, Vyasa, and therefore the Kriya Yoga needs to be understood by a student of yoga. Now this Kriya Yoga, if you look into the sutra, it has been so briefly put in, but it is impregnated with enormous purport. Patanjali defines Kriya Yoga in the sutra like the words that he has used. Tapasvadhyayeshwara pranidhananai Kriyayoga. He is incarnation of a Tapasvi. He is also personified Swadhyayin, Swadhyaya Shila, and of course Ishvara Pranidhan. So here we perhaps get stuck into the concept of tapas, which comes in Puranas, which comes in Dharma Shastra. We know there are so many forms of tapas: kayik, vachik, manasik tapas, and tapas in the form of Chandrayana, Santapanadi vratas. And these are the vratas and tapas which comes in mythology. We are also familiar with various kinds of tapas performed by those noble people of mythology. And therefore, tapas means immediately brings to our thought such kind of austerities which are practiced. But now, being accomplished Jnana Yogi, Karma Yogi, Dhyana Yogi and Bhakti Yogi, his tapas is of altogether a different nature. Not in the sense we conceive the idea of tapas. That is one thing. And then we tend to understand these three factors as separate blocks. Something is understood as tapas, then something is understood as swadhyaya, and something is understood as Ishwar pranidhana. That is what is our idea about tapas, swadhyaya, and Ishwar pranidhana. But this sutra is not referring to tapas and swadhyaya and Ishwar pranidhana, but a combination, integration of these three. It is three in one and not three things. Because being a profound and proficient jnana yogi, karma yogi, dhyana yogi, bhakti yogi, the idea of tapas is not as it is for a common man, layman. Perform some kayik tapas, vachik tapas, manasik tapas, satvik tapas. Or even there are rajasic and tamasic tapas according to Bhagavad Gita. So we characterize something as tapas, and it is unrelated to swadhyaya. We look at swadhyaya which is unrelated to tapas. Then we take something as Ishwar pranidhana which is unrelated to tapas and unrelated to sadhyaya. So our idea of tapas and swadhyaya and Ishwar pranidhana are that these are separate blocks, and we tend to understand them as watertight compartments. But that's the case of common man. Some practices will be designated as tapas, some other practices will be designated as swadhyaya, and some other practices will be designated as Ishwar pranidhana. Because the tapas, swadhyaya, Ishwar pranidhana also comes in niyamas in Patanjali's text. In the 5 niyamas, the 3 are tapas, swadhyaya, and Ishwar pranidhana, and apart from 3, then we have shaucha and santosha. So 5 niyamas also include the 3 in the form of tapas, swadhyaya, Ishwar pranidhana. But the connotation and the practices and the framework of all those is totally different. There is one framework for conduct of tapas, practice of tapas, or taking up of tapas. There is another framework for taking up swadhyaya, and there is another framework for taking up Ishwar pranidhana. That is what it happens in the niyamas. Because niyamas deals with these 3 plus 2 more. Whereas here, that is not the case. It is one framework within which you will find tapas, swadhyaya, Ishwar pranidhana, and not 3 frames of tapas, swadhyaya, Ishwar pranidhana. I repeat again, that is the case of niyamas, and now here it is integrated body. The 3 are unified. The 3 are integrated, and therefore we need to have a special kind of consideration of the Kriyayoga, which unfortunately in our yoga of our times we don't really consider it, because we are fascinated with Ashtanga Yoga of Patanjali and not Kriyayoga of Patanjali. So the point is that it is not that these 3 are Kriyayoga, but 3 coming together, 3 in 1, would be Kriyayoga. Now, because of practice of and inculcation of karma yogic philosophy, jnana yogic philosophy, dhyana yogic philosophy, bhakti yogic philosophy, it's definitely a different life, different conduct of life. The life is on a different pedestal. The consciousness is also on a different pedestal. And being on such pedestal, very life of that person is infested by tapas. The sutra doesn't suggest that Kriyayogi practices tapas. The tapas is infesting his life. The tapas is permeating his life. It is not that some part of the day he performs some tapas and some austerities, like it is the case of tapas in dharma and tapas in Ashtanga yoga. So tapas is part of his life. It is subsuming complete life because of the philosophy of the four yogs inculcated, imbibed, and assimilated. So is the case of Swadhyaya. It is not that some hours of the day he spends for Swadhyaya, like we would be doing. We would be reading Moksha Shastra, we would be studying Moksha Shastra Adhyanam during some hours of a day at the most. Or we would be doing mantra sadhana, Gayatri Adi, Omkar Adi, mantra sadhana for some time of the day. Whereas here, he is personification of Swadhyaya, as much as he is personification of tapas. 24/7 and entire duration span of his life, it is tapas. Life itself is tapas and life itself is Swadhyaya. Because Swadhyaya is Om Pranavadi Pavitrana Mantro Japaha and Moksha Shastra Adhyanam. Now he is not that doing Adhyana for a couple of hours every day. He is personified Swadhyaya. He lives in Swadhyaya. His life is Swadhyaya. His life is Moksha Shastram. Life itself is what Moksha Shastram is trying to relate to us, or what the Moksha Shastra tells us. His life itself is that. So also Ishvara Pranidhana. It is not that couple of hours of a day he does some bhakti, he does some nama sadhana, which we commoners are used to, and we might be doing it. Puja, Arsha, nama sadhana, japa sadhana for some time of the day. And we might do it regularly. Allocate some time of the day for it. But he is bhakta by himself. So a bhakta, a devotee, a bhakta, is not that part of the day he is in bhakti. He is incarnation of bhakti. His life is structured, permeated, subsumed by bhakti. It is drenched in bhakti. So his life is drenched in tapas, life is drenched in Swadhyaya, or the purport of Swadhyaya, the essence of Swadhyaya, and also his life is drenched in bhakti. That is a Kriya yogi. So point to be understood that Kriya yoga, the nature of tapas, Swadhyaya, Ishvara Pranidhana, is not that these are three frameworks, and he handles three frameworks and goes into three frames, but he is in a frame which is of all the three together. So we will have to have our imagination and thought as to how there can be integration, a blend or a compound of principles of tapas, principles of Swadhyaya, principles of Ishvara Pranidhana, essence of tapas, essence of Swadhyaya, essence of Ishvara Pranidhana. We need to have imagination here as to what it might be, and best imagination is that he is a proficient Jnana yogi. Then we will understand he lives Jnana yoga. He not only knows Jnana Yoga, he lives Jnana Yoga. Similarly, he lives Karma Yoga, and not only that, he knows Karma Yoga. He lives Dhyana Yoga, and not that he knows Dhyana Yoga. He lives Bhakti Yoga, and not that he knows Bhakti Yoga. So he lives in it. His life, like if you look at a person from front, you have particular perception of the person. If you see the person from behind, you have another perception of the person. If you see the person from the sides, you have another perception of the person. So, here it is combination of all the three. It is difficult to put in words, but it is a combination of the three because of personification of Jnana, Dhyana, Karma, Bhakti, Yoga. And being a Jnana Yogi, Karma Yogi, Bhakti Yogi, Dhyana Yogi by himself. These four aspects which we discussed earlier are designated as Kriyayoga, and then the life can be characterized that it is life of a Tapasvi, a life of a Swadhyayi, and life of a Bhakta. And it is three together, a compound of all the three. That is how Kriya Yoga and Kriya Yogi is. Kriya Yoga is not one yoga. Kriya Yoga is combination of all the four, blend of all the four, gel or gelled condition of all the four. So that's how we need to just imagine what a Kriya Yogi would be. And it would be fascinating to see that Kriya Yogi is embodiment of all the four yogs, and it is four yogis in one yogi. Jnana Yogi, Karma Yogi, Dhyana Yogi, Bhakti Yogi in one yogi. So the point is now to decipher this concept of a unified condition of three aspects, tapas, swadhyaya, ishwara, and the four yogs in one. What can be said is that he is not performing tapas, but he lives life of Tapasvi. Not that he performs tapas or austerities with which we are familiar, but his life itself is tapas. He lives tapas. And therefore, he is something like Mahamanava, super human being. It is not that you will identify kayik, vachik, manasik tapas in him as frameworks. There is something is called as kayik tapas, something is called as vachik tapas, something is called as manasika tapas. So there are no such frames. The tapas is flowing in within him. He is a fount hole of tapas. The tapas is flowing from him, and not that he is practicing tapas. So also about Swadhyaya. Our idea of Swadhyaya is to be studying Moksha Shastram. Mantropasana and Moksha Shastra Adhyanam. This is our idea of Swadhyaya. He doesn't do that. It's all over. It's all over for him. So he doesn't do that. It is not that he is reading Gita Shastram, he is reading Upanishad Shastra, he is reading Vedanta Shastra, he is reading Sankhya Shastra, or he is studying those. He's not reading, studying those. So the Moksha Shastra Adhyatma Shastra, Dharma Shastra, Karma Shastra, Upanishad Shastra, Vedanta Shastra, Yoga Shastra. They are all assimilated, and he is embodiment of all the essence of these Shastras. His life is essence of all the Moksha Shastras which I just now listed. Moksha Shastra, Adhyatma Shastra, Dharma Shastra, Karma Shastra, Vedanta Shastra, Upanishad Shastra, Yoga Shastra. So they are flowing in him, and just as our body contains blood, our entire body contains blood, his entire body contains the substance of these aspects of Moksha Shastra. And not only that, he practices mantropasana, his life itself is mantra puta. That means it is completely infested by the essence of mantra. His life itself is a mantra. It is not that he is repeating the Om, his life itself is Om. His life is complete philosophy of Om, complete essence of Om, complete quintessence of Om. That is what his life is. So the study aspect of all this is it is over. Studying, understanding, comprehending, it's all over. But he is now personification of Swadhyaya, while he is also personification of tapas and as well as Ishvara Pranidhanam. So is the case of Ishvara Pranidhana of Kriyayogi. It is not that he is in bhakti. It is not that he is in bhakti. He is carrying out practices of bhakti. He is accomplished bhakta. He himself is a bhakta. So it will be fascinating, and it will be demanding quite an intuition to really conceive what Kriya Yogi is. And unfortunately, in our times, nobody is really fascinated with Kriya Yoga of Patanjali and Kriya Yogi, which Patanjali has mentioned. So, if you want to really again crystallize this life, for which can help you have good imagination, sufficient imagination and intuition about, or the pratibha, intuitive wisdom about Kriya Yoga, try to read the Sthita Prajna Darshanam, which comes in Bhagavad Gita 2nd chapter. So, essence of that Sthita Prajna Darshanam can be found in this Kriya Yogi. Then in the 6th chapter, there is description of Dhyana Yogi. And in the 12th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, there is description of Bhakti Yogi. And in the 14th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, there is Gunatita. And then in the 18th chapter, you have description of Dhyana Yogi. So, Sthita Prajna is a mold out of Jnana Yogic philosophy. So, you will see that a yogi turned out from the mold of Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga can be found in Bhagavad Gita. And that is what this Kriya Yogi is. He is not only a Sthita Prajna, he is Sthita Prajna plus Dhyana Yogi plus Bhakti Yogi plus Gunatita plus Dhyana Yogi. And all these descriptions have come in Bhagavad Gita, which I just now told you. Chapter 2, Sthita Prajna Darshan. chapter 6, Abhyasa Yogi, Dhyana Yogi. Then chapter 12, Bhakti Yogi. Chapter 14, Gunatita. And chapter 18, Dhyana Yogi. So if you look into those portrayals of the yogis which come in Bhagavad Gita, which we should be doing to justify this session, so that is Kriyayoga. Now today we have a brand of Kriyayoga prevalent in our times. And then the Kriyayoga includes the Shat Kriyas of Hatha Yoga. And therefore the Kriyayoga means one who is in practices of Shat Kriya of Hatha Yoga is said to be a Kriya Yogi, and that is said to be Kriyayoga. But that is misleading. Patanjali is not referring to the Shat Kriyas here. The Shat Kriyas are already part of his embodiment. It is not that he is in practices of Neti, Dhauti, Basti, Kapal, Bhati, etc., etc. They are already done in his formative periods. Now this is not a formative period. He is just a rung below Uttamadhikari. He just steps in on that rung, higher rung, and he becomes Uttamadhikari. So we should not be misled by prevalent Kriya Yoga in our times, which is practices of Shat Kriyas such as Neti, Basti, Dhauti, Trataka, Kapalabhati. But that is all in the formative periods. That is gone past long time back in the life of a Kriya Yogi. Some previous lives, all that is accomplished. So, not to mistake with prevalent Kriya Yoga. That is very important mention for people in our era. So, now we will try to look at the Bhagavad Gita, which characterizes these yogis. And with that, perhaps we can be concluding on the Kriya Yoga of this sutra, or the first sutra of this chapter. So the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, we get the mention of Sthita Prajna from Sri Bhagavan Sri Krishna. So these are the verses. Prajahati yada kaman sarvan parthamanogatan atmanyevatmana tushta sthita prajnastadochate dukkeshu anudvignamanaha sukheshu vigataspruhaha vitaraga bhajakrodha sthitiri muniruchyate yah sarvatra anabhisnehas tattat prapya shubha shubham नाभिनंदति न द्वेष्टि तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता यदा संभरते चायं कूर्मोऽङ्गानि सर्वशः इन्द्रियाणि इन्द्रियार्थेभ्यः तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता. So this is how Sthita Prajna has been portrayed in very words of Bhagavan Sri Krishna. So Bhagavan says, Arjuna, when one thoroughly dismisses all cravings of mind and is satisfied in the self through the joy of the self, then he is called Sthita Prajna. The sage whose mind remains unperturbed amidst sorrows, whose thirst for pleasures has altogether disappeared, and one who is free from passion, fear, anger, is called Sthita Prajna. He who is unattached to everything and meeting the good and evil neither rejoices nor recoils is said to be sthita prajna. When like tortoise which draws all its limbs from all directions, this sthita prajna withdraws his senses from all the sense objects and he is said to be sthita prajna. So, this is how sthita prajna is described. And it should be understood that here the vairagya of the nature of yatamana, vyatireka ekendriya have been contained in these verses. So, this is how sthita prajna is described. And now we go to the 6th chapter where the yogi has been described. Lord Krishna defines the yoga in the 6th chapter in the verse 23. Tam vidya dukkha sanyoga viyogam yoga sagnitam sa nischayena yoktavyo yogo anirvinna chetasa. What is yoga? That state is called yoga, which is free from the contact of sorrow in form of transmigration, should be known. Nay, this yoga should be resolutely practiced with an unwearied mind. And then he goes on describing this yogi. Sankalpa prabhavan kaman styaktva sarvana sheshataha manasaiva indriya gramam vinimya samantataha. The 24th verse tells us, which is of course the description of a yogi from Lord Krishna himself, completely renouncing all desires arising from thoughts of world and fully restraining the whole pack of the senses from all the sides of mind. Then Shanai Shanair Uparamed Edat Buddhya Dhruti Gruhitaya Atma Samstham Manakrutva Na Kinchidapi Chintayet. This yogi should thoroughly, gradually practice. Through his gradual practice, he attains a tranquility and fixity of the mind on divinity. Through reasons controlled by steadfastness, he should not think of anything else. Then in the next verse, he says, Yato yato nischarati manaschanchalamassthiram tatastato niyamyeitad atmanyeva vasham nayet. Drawing back the restless and fidgety of the mind from all those objects after which it runs, he should repeatedly fix it on God, or he fixes it on God. Prashanta manasahim yenam yoginam sukhamuttamam upaiti rashantarajasam brahmabhuta kalmasham. For to the yogi whose mind is perfectly serene, who is sinless, whose passion is subdued, and who is identified with Brahman, the embodiment of truth, knowledge and bliss, supreme happiness comes as a matter of course. So this is the description of a yogi. Yunjaneva sadatmanam yogi vigata kalmashaha sukhena brahma samsparshat atyantam sukham ashnute. This sinless yogi, thus uniting his self constantly with divinity, easily enjoys the eternal bliss of oneness with Brahman. Sarvabhuta atmanam sarvabhutani chatmani ikshate yoga yuktatma sarvatra samadarshanaha. The yogi, this dhyana yogi who is united with in the identity with the all-pervading infinite consciousness of divinity and sees unity, therefore, everywhere. Beholds the self present in all beings and all beings as assumed in self. Then yo mam pashyati sarvatra sarvatra mai pashyati tasyaham na pranashyami sachame na pranashyati. So the dhyana yogi will be or is present in all beings, and all beings he sees in divinity and divinity in all beings. And that's the adhyagnya aspect which Bhagavad Gita speaks of. So he sees that all beings are indwelled by divinity, and all the beings are in divinity, and divinity is in all beings. And therefore, he never loses the sight. He never loses the sight of divinity. Because even if he is seeing the things and people, he sees the divinity immanent in all those things and people. And therefore, he doesn't lose the sight of divinity. And that's yomam pashyati sarvatra sarvatram mai pashyati. And therefore he says, I never leave these people. I am all the time holding on to these yogis. Sarvabhuta sthitam yomam bhajatyekatvam asthitaha sarvatha vartamanopi sa yogi mai vartate. The yogi who is established in union with me and worships me as residing in all beings as their self abides in me, no matter what he does. Atmavamyena sarvatra samam pashyati yo Arjuna sukham va yadi va dukkham so yogi paramo mataha. Finally he says, Arjuna, he who looks on all as one, on the analogy of his own self, and looks upon the joy and sorrow of all with a similar eye, such yogi is deemed to be highest. So this is dhyana yogi, according to classical idea and concept, he is all the time citing divinity. He is one with divinity. He is one with Bhagavan. So that's how the yogi has been described in the 6th chapter. Then in the 12th chapter, we get the mention of Bhakti Yogi. Adveshta sarvabhutanam maitra karuna evacha nirmamo nirahankaraha samadukha sukhakshami. And then santushtaha satatam yogi yatatma dhrudha nishchayaha mayyarpita manor buddhir yo madbhakta same priya. So 13 and 14 verses of the 12th chapter, Lord says, he who is free from malice towards all beings, friendly and compassionate, rid of I-ness, mine-ness, balanced in joy and sorrow, forgiving by nature, ever centered and mentally united with me, nay, who has subdued his mind, senses and body, has a free resolve and has surrendered his mind and reason to me. That devotee of mine is dear to me. Yasmanno dishvate loko lokanno dvijate cha yaha harshamarsa bhayodvegai mukto yah sachame priyaha. He who is not a source of annoyance to his fellow creatures and who is in turn doesn't get annoyed or vexed by anyone, he who is free from delight and envy, perturbation and fear is dear to me. Anapekshaha shuchirdaksha udasino gatavyathaha sarvarambha parityagi yo madbhakta same priyaha. He who wants nothing, who is both internally and externally pure, is clever and impartial and has risen above all distractions, and who renounces the feeling of doership in all undertakings, such devotee is dear to me. यो न रुष्यति न द्वेष्टि न शोचति न कांक्षति शुभाशुभ परित्यागी भक्तिमान्य मे समे प्रियः. He who is neither rejoicing or hating, nor grieves nor desires, he who renounces both good and evil actions and is full of devotion is dear to me. समः शत्रौ च मित्रे च तथा मानापमानयोः शीतोष्ण सुख दुःखेषु समः संग विवर्जितः तुल्यनिन्दा स्तुतिर्मौनी संतुष्टो येन केनचित् अनिकेत स्थिरमतिर् भक्तिमान् मे प्रियो नरः. He who is alike to friends and foes, as well as to any honor and ignominy, he who remains balanced in heat and cold, pleasure and pain, and the other contraries, experiences and is free from any attachment, he who takes praise and reproach alike, and is given to contemplation and contented with any means of subsistence whatsoever, entertaining no sense of ownership and attachment in respect of his dwelling place, and full devotion for me is dear to me. ये तु धर्म्यामृतम् इदं यथोक्तं पर्युपासते श्रद्धाधाना मत्परमा भक्तास्ते अतीव मे प्रियः. The most beloved to Bhagavan is described. Those devotees, however, who partake in a disinterested way of this nectar of pious wisdom set forth above, endowed with faith and solely devoted to me, are extremely dear to me. So that's how in the 12th chapter the Bhakti Yogi has been described. Then comes the 14th chapter to describe the Gunatita. Again, a very fascinating passage that you get in the 14th chapter, which is in description of Gunatita. The Sattva, Raja, Tama are three gunas, and one who transcends these is called Gunatita. So the Gunatita has been described in the verses, in words of Bhagavan himself, starting from 22. Prakasham cha pravrittim cha mohameva cha pandava na dveshti sampravruttani na nivruttani kankshati. Bhagavan says, Arjuna, he who hates not light, sattva, or activity, the rajas, and the stupor, the tamas, when prevalent, nor longs for them when they are seized. Udasina avadasino gunairyo na vichalyate gunavartanta ityeva yo avatisthati nengate. He who is sitting like a witness is not disturbed by gunas, and who, knowing that gunas alone move among the gunas, remains established in identity with the God and never falls off from that state. Sama dukkha sukha swastha samaloštashma kanchana tulya priya priyo dhiras tulya ninda atma samsruti. He who is ever established in the self and takes woes and joys alike, regards the clod of earth, a stone, a piece of gold equal in value, is possessed of wisdom, receives the pleasant as well as the unpleasant in the same mind, in same spirit, and views censure and praise alike. Then मानापमानयोः स्थूल्य मित्ररिपक्षयोः सर्वारंभ परित्यागी गुणातीत स उच्यते. So he is again equal, even-minded, who is indifferent to honor and ignominy. He is alike to the cause of a friend as well as to that of an enemy, and has renounced the sense of doership in all undertakings. He is said to be risen above the three gunas. माम च यो अव्यभिचारेण भक्ति योगेन सेवते स गुणान् समस्तित्वेव ब्रह्म भूयाय कल्पते. He who has constantly worshipped me and is worshipping me through the yoga of exclusive devotion, transcending these three gunas, he becomes eligible for attaining Brahman. So that's how the Gunatita is described in the 14th chapter. Then finally in the 18th chapter, there is a passage which describes the yogi. And this is the Kriyayogi. This is accomplished yogi. This is a complete yogi. And he is described in the verses of the 18th chapter, starting from 51. So it's a very enchanting passage. Buddhya vishuddhya yuktaha dhruti atmanam niyamya cha shabdadin vishayan staktva ragadvesho vidasya cha vivakta sevi lagvashi yat vakkaya manasa dhyana yoga paro nityam vairagyam samupashritaha ahankaram balam darpam kamam krodham parigraham विमुच्य निर्मम शांत ब्रह्म भूयाय कल्पते ब्रह्मभूत प्रसन्नात्मान शुचि न कांक्षति समः सर्वेषु भूतेषु मद्भक्ति लभते पराम. So he says, endowed with an untarnished intellect and partaking the light of sattva and regulated in diet, having in a lonely place for his living, which is undefiled place, having rejected shabdadi vishayas of the senses and controlled in mind, speech and body by restraining the chitta, the senses through the firmness of sattvic type, taking resolute stand on dispassion after having completely got rid of attraction and aversion, attachment and aversion, remaining ever devoted to yoga of meditation, having given up egoism, violence, arrogance, lust, anger, and luxuries, devoid of the feeling of mime, and who is tranquil in the heart, establishing identity with the Brahman, which is truth, consciousness and bliss, and cheerful in mind ever, Sankhya Yogi, no longer grieves nor craves for anything. The same to all beings, such yogi attains the supreme devotion for me. So, these are the descriptions of Jnana Yogi, Dhyana Yogi, Karma Yogi, Bhakti Yogi. And beautiful summary of it comes in 18th chapter, which was just now recited and related to you. So that's how we have to understand this Kriya Yogi, who is a composite yogi in all the four yogs. And that his life itself is personified tapas plus swadhyay plus ishvara pranidhana. They are all integrated. They are all three in one condition and not three different conditions. So that is what Kriyayoga is. Vachaspati has beautifully illustrated the Kriyayoga in his commentary called Tattva Vaisharadi, and he first time brings to our notice that he is Jnana Yogi, Karma Yogi, Dhyana Yogi, Bhakti Yogi, and it is Karma Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, Karma Bhakti Yoga, and Dhyana Yoga which is going to attenuate the kleshas. Now that's how the Kriya Yoga and Kriya Yogi can be described. So we took an account of the first sutra of the Sadhana Pada, which so briefly is worded but with enormous purport. The purport of essence of Jnana, Dhyana, Karma, Bhakti in the three terms of Tapasvi, Adhyaya, Ishvara, Pradhana, composite. So with that, we will end the session today. Namaskar all of you.